I used to take this street a lot faster. Those were the days. Not many people or cars back then, just fields and farmhouses. I came to Citrus Heights in 1953, the year I was made. They said a group of ladies needed me for medical emergencies.
A splint on his leg. Everything's going to be okay.
That's how I got my name, Rescue. But my story goes a little further back. Let me tell you how it started. Citrus Heights had a lot of family farms in the 1930s. The nearest firefighter was a half-hour away in Sacramento. In 1933, a barn on Sunrise Boulevard caught fire. Chief Desmond and Virgil Mulch watched helplessly as it burned to the ground. So Gene, along with Virgil Mulch and a few other families, started their own volunteer fire department. They raised money to buy equipment and trained themselves how to fight fires. Gene quickly noticed a problem. The men had jobs and were not available most of the day to fight fires. So Gene trained the women how to fight fires too. Wives, sisters, and friends.
They were doing what needed to be done because their husbands were not available. They were not turning down any type of fire that needed to be fought.
They'd get the call, and it didn't matter what they were doing. They'd put on these blue jumpsuits over their clothes. For me, it's interesting to see what footwear they have on because it's not necessarily the sturdiest of footwear. There's an interesting array of sandals and shoes with little heels that you would not wear firefighting, but time was of the essence.
A couple of them, anyway, were bus drivers also for the school district. So they knew how to drive, and they were ready to go. They weren't afraid of this stuff. They said that Lola Oldham was not afraid to go up to the roof. She would ride on the back of the trucks, and she would climb the ladders. The oldest daughter of Lola Oldham, if the siren came at dinner time, she got to finish cooking the dinner and take care of the children while her mother got picked up to go put the fire out. And so this was a family investment.
A siren at the main station alerted everyone to a fire. 1 blast for a grass fire, 2 blasts for a structure fire. It could be heard for miles. One day it blew and just kept going. Everyone sensed that something was really wrong, and they were right. Pearl Harbor had just been bombed.
The men of the community, including the firefighters, were called to war. A lot of the women in Southern California in particular became Rosie the Riveters. Here in Citrus Heights, the need was for firefighting. And so in late 1941, Chief Desmond and his wife Zella formed the Ladies Auxiliary, one of the country's earliest all-female volunteer firefighting organizations.
They had grit. They were unique. They loved each other. They really cared for the community, and they had families that they wanted to protect. They weren't going to wait for someone to come from Sacramento to come put their fires out. That wasn't going to happen.
House fires were especially devastating. Occupants were left with a lot of smoke and water damage to deal with. Most did not have insurance to cover losses. So the ladies went the extra mile.
It wasn't unusual for them to pick up the brooms and mops after a fire and to clean the house. And they also, if there was an instance of a family that lost their clothing and everything in a fire, so they threw an organized party where people could bring them clothing as presents.
Aside from fighting fires, the ladies maintained normal lives. The Central Fire Station played host to many socials.
They had square dances, ballroom dancing, they had card games, they had potlucks. And the kids would just run all through the place and around, and the parents who really did enjoy each other a lot.
When World War II ended, the ladies continued fighting fires. The need was there. Their biggest challenge came in 1947 when a large military installation caught fire.
Camp Kohler had a lot of structures that were built on cement blocks with just 2x4s and chicken wire and tar paper structures.
There was quite a few oil drums stored, which went off like skyrockets. It was such a big fire that there was, a number of firefighters there. That fighting alongside women was a novelty, but they proved themselves and received numerous compliments from their colleagues.
It was horribly traumatic for these women, and they had been there for, I think, 6 hours till 9 o'clock at night fighting this fire. 2 of the women got second-degree burns and had to go to the hospital. The thing that cinched it, that they just really didn't want to wreck their physical health over fighting fires.
In 1947, men had returned from the war. The Ladies' Auxiliary sensed their time of service was at an end and disbanded late in 1947. The women quietly refocused their lives on more traditional roles. Then, just a few years later, something happened as Chief Desmond and his firefighters responded to a fire off of Auburn Boulevard.
On the way, they came to an accident on Auburn involving a bus and a car. And with the one fire truck, they stopped, and Chief Desmond quickly realized that some of the firefighters had to stay and deal with the medical emergencies of the traffic accident while he sent the rest of the firefighters and the truck off to fight the fires. It was at that moment he realized, we need help. The Desmonds and Mary Bost and Esteline Mulch, who are all from the Ladies' Auxiliary, and then Louise Patterson. They founded the Ladies in White in 1951 to respond primarily in the beginning to medical emergencies. It's a pioneering concept in that women in this capacity working in conjunction with firefighters is a novel concept in the country and hadn't happened before.
And I think the Ladies in White brought that awareness of, wait a minute, emergency medical services is huge. And they pushed that thought, that mentality, to the administration at Citrus Heights Fire, who said, you know what, they're on to something here, and we probably better pursue that.
Different circumstances led to becoming a Lady in White. For Shirley Verhines, it was a tragic accident that claimed the life of her 4-year-old daughter. The Ladies in White responded to the call.
They did everything they could to help us. And at one point then the captain, who was Mary Bost, came by to see me a few months later and said, Shirley, why don't you join the Ladies in White? I think she felt that I had, dealt more or less rationally when it was my own child, which I did, and I'm kind of a do what needs to be done and fall apart later type person, which she thought was, and it was, ideal for the rescue squad. And I did join the Ladies in White.
My daughter, every time she got hurt, even if she stubbed her toe, almost went into shock. And I decided I needed to do something to figure out what to do with this kid, And so basically that's how I got involved.
My friends could not believe that I could do such a thing. No, I just got all positive remarks.
We had a knock on our door one day. There was a big fire truck out front, and they were citing us for illegal trash burn in our backyard. And so from that point on, they talked my husband into being a firefighter. And then I joined the Ladies in White later on in 1963. I don't know what I was thinking. I had a full-time job, and I had 2 small children under the age of 5. And my husband had a full-time job, and when did I think I would have time for this? However, I didn't think that way then. It just was a natural happening, and it was the best decision I ever made.
We had white coveralls. I believe they were from J.C. Penney. So, and we put the emblems on there, and that was our uniform, that and white tennis shoes.
When I pop out of bed in the middle of the night, you put on the white coveralls. They were like painters' uniforms, you know, the white coveralls, and run to the car. My first aid kit was in the car already. That's another thing. Some of the ladies that were closer to the central station were issued first aid kits, but I made my own out of an old 1950s train case, and I put in, you know, bandages and triangular bandages they used to use then, all the medical supplies that I might need.
We had radios in our homes, and we would call the dispatcher and say, well, I'm available to go on a call, check me in, or I'm not available, check me out. And we would listen for our radios. And after a while, our guests and our family, everyone were trained, when that radio goes off, everyone stops talking. It could be 3 o'clock in the morning, and your radio would go off. If it was in your area, you'd be sent directly to the call. We would basically provide relief of bleeding, breathing, poisoning, the very life-threatening things that you're taught in advanced first aid at the time, because that's what we had.
I had no medical background at all, so I had to learn it. And we were trained by the Red Cross and the hospitals, and we would go to monthly big training sessions.
Going to weekly drills, sometimes you might grouse a little bit and think you didn't want to go to drill, but they were all important. I got to be the victim. And I always took the job of letting them try the oxygen, giving oxygen to me, because I always got to lay down on the job at the drills.
We would practice on Wednesday nights at Station 21, and sometimes they would teach us things that we probably would never use, but they wanted us to just be familiar with it. And the jaws of life, we did practice on that a little bit.
But just doing things like that, and how to clear an airway, how to properly, suspend the head so you can do mouth to mouth. And what do you do when somebody's going into shock? What do you do when somebody has an exposed compound fracture with the bone sticking out of the leg?
Please tell me he's gonna be okay.
Along with their training, the ladies took part in rescue and safety display competitions. They competed against other emergency teams locally and across the country, and they did quite well. It all paid off when a call came on the radio.
I go straight from my home to the address of the call, and a lot of times we really didn't know what we were in for, and that's when the adrenaline kicked in. It's like, what am I going to face? Am I going to be the first one there? I always used to doubt myself, am I going to know what to do? But then when the circumstance happens, it just clicks, and you know, and you do it. And it just comes with the great training that they gave us.
I had a neighbor that was also a lady in white, and so we would alternate. I would sign in that I'm available for calls. She would make sure she's not available for calls, and that whoever's available was dispatched. There was someone else to take care of the kids. Well, if I got a call, she would, Linda down the street would hear it at the same time. So she would start running up the street, and I'd be going down the street, and here's my son, and that was it.
I did work full-time, and after working all day long, you would come home, and because you wanted to make sure there was coverage, I would call and tell them I was available to go on a call. And yes, you may get up and go out at 3 o'clock in the morning. Hopefully you're only gone an hour or so, but you have to come home and try to go back to sleep and then get up and go to work.
A lot of times my husband would respond to a structure fire, and then shortly after that a first aid call would be dispatched. And I would go, and if I couldn't get the neighbor to babysit for the children, then I had to take them with me and put them in the back seat of my car and strap them in. And they were anywhere about 5, 6, 7 years old. And they would actually sit there the whole time and we would drive to the scene of the auto accident or the call or whatever, and there were so many red lights and sirens and activity that it would keep them busy.
The ladies in white kept busy too, responding to over 500 emergency calls every year. There were all types of emergencies.
Somebody elderly who didn't wake up, babies choking, people falling in swimming pools, babies falling in swimming pools, somebody falling, breaking an ankle. A lot of auto accidents, motorcycle accidents.
I remember one that was real early in the morning, like about 2, was somebody that had too much to drink, and he had passed out and wasn't breathing. At that time, we didn't have all the fancy stuff they have now. I mean, it was mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, and I was the first one on the scene. And so I had to go in and prepare the guy for mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, which was horrible. And he survived.
Many calls had happy outcomes. In most cases, though, the ladies never learned what happened after someone left their care. Some calls were heartbreaking.
9-month-old baby whose lungs filled up, and we couldn't do a thing for the baby. Transported the baby to the hospital, and baby didn't survive, unfortunately, but walking past the parents in the emergency or in the waiting room, and they ask you, and all you can say is, "The doctor will be right with you." And so these are the types of things that the volunteers take home with them. This is what you live with.
A lot of times I cried my way home in the car, that kind of thing. And then I'd be home and, the kids would be, "What's the matter?" So. There was one, we were headed down to an auto accident, and I think it was one of the captains came up and said, "You're not needed down there." And so, we asked, why? And it was a total decapitation, and he just told us, "You don't need to see that. There's nothing you can do anyway." I was very grateful for that.
Some calls, even though injuries were involved, had a lighter side to them.
The motorcyclists were always interesting because I don't care how badly they were hurt, don't cut my leathers. When they're hurt like that, the first thing they think about, I paid that much for these leathers, and they didn't want them cut off, and we'd have to just say sorry and cut them because the bone would be sticking out.
One of them was right on the other side of Sylvan Middle School, and a car made a left turn in front of this motorcycle, and he went right up over the car and had all kinds of injuries, and we splinted him all up before he was taken off. And then we had another motorcycle accident on Antelope, and then the third one. All 3 of those accidents happened on the same day, and the same highway patrolman made all 3 reports. Highway patrolman said, "What do you say that we call this a day and not have any more motorcycle accidents?"
There was a bar called Cripple Creek, and in the middle of the night they had a lot of fights, sliced with glass or whatever. They weren't the fun calls. So I would sometimes take my Dalmatian, and she would be in the car, so I would feel safer going and coming and getting in the car after the call. She wasn't much of a killer, but nobody knows that but me.
Of all the different types of emergencies, there was one everyone wanted to be called on: delivering a baby. Many ladies had that opportunity, and it led to a tradition.
Winnie Wiesman, we have one of her uniforms, and it has this safety pin with, I think, it's 6 or 7 little safety pins attached to it, which means that's how many babies she delivered during her time as a volunteer.
Emergency calls involved the needs of more than just the victim. The ladies didn't overlook anyone.
You have a man who has chest pain, and you've got a wife that's distraught, and you may have children that are on the scene. And I saw them take care of a lot of those personal family issues. You know, let me stay with you, let me watch the children, let me drive you to the hospital in your personal vehicle while the husband goes in the ambulance. A battalion chief came into the emergency room. I was working evening shift. It's about 11 o'clock at night, freezing cold outside, and he said, "Is there anybody in here who can take a ride with me? We have a young man trapped in a vehicle. Probably wouldn't survive if we didn't give him some IV fluids and bring his blood pressure up." So they came and picked me up, and away I went in my white nurse's uniform. I remember crawling inside that pickup truck and my old glass bottle of IV fluid and needles, and started an IV in that young man, and he actually survived.
This accident brought to light a need for a higher level of emergency medical care than what the ladies in white were equipped to provide.
But really all they could offer was basic first aid. They didn't have advanced life support. And so in the late 70s, when the state of California said, you know, we need to increase that level of training.
They have so much better equipment, better policies. You know, they can get to the doctors. They actually talk to doctors over their phone. They give shots. We could not do any of that stuff.
We're housewives. You know, I couldn't go to paramedic school. I didn't have time for that. I had other things, priorities, and most of the other women were the same. If you've looked into the 53 Pontiac ambulance, there's nothing in there hardly but splints and that sort of thing. They didn't have defibrillators and all kinds of things that the paramedics had. So it was time for the new technology to be used, and we were kind of obsolete, and that was okay. It was okay. You know, we were ready to go on.
And I look back on it and think, wow, I really did that. I feel proud of it. I really do, because I think we provided a service that wasn't there. There would have been a lot of people laying by the side of the road waiting for an ambulance to pick them up, and maybe laying there for a long time without any care at all.
My sons, they were bragging everywhere. You know, they just thought a lady in white, that was just the greatest. And when my son would go by and he'd see me at an accident and, you know, doing something, he was all puffed up. And when I left, he was really disappointed because he no longer had bragging rights.
8.5 months pregnant when I did my last run. And I had responded to a car wreck, and I got out of the squad, and Ivan Jackson, who was battalion chief, looked at me and said, "How far along are you?" I said, "Oh, about 8.5 months. He says, "I don't want to see you anymore." So that was the end of my career as a lady in white.
I am so glad I did it. It gives you a feeling of worth. I felt positive going in and learning. I felt like I could take care of my own kids better with the training. And I felt I was doing something for my community, and that's important.
There were basic things that had to be done. And so they weren't going to sit and watch the field burn up. They weren't going to see someone's property get wrecked. They were going to go out and help. If I had been there, I would have loved to have gone along with them. They were people that didn't hesitate, and they had fun while they were doing it.
It's an example of how women could help in a very big way, in a non-traditional way, and they succeeded beautifully at it. It's part of our history, and it needs to be told.
Well, that's my story. The ladies gave their all, then quietly slipped away when the time was right, and I'm proud to have served alongside them. Their time of service is over, but mine keeps going. My job is to preserve their legacy. So, when you see me in a parade or at a car show, remember the Citrus Heights ladies who came to the rescue.